Evan Gershkovich and others released in a historic U.S.-Russia prisoner swap.
And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free.
Plus, Israel braces for Iran's retaliation.
So I suspect there will be some kind of Iranian response. It might be something similar to what we saw in April, the combination of use of missiles and drones and so forth. But how big it will be is something they clearly are still deciding in Tehran.
And later, F-16s begin arriving in Ukraine. We'll get an update from Kyiv. And a North Korean diplomat has defected to the West. We'll find out what he's been saying. Today is Thursday, August 1st. And this is VOA's Flashpoint, Global Crises. Good evening, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. The latest from the Middle East in just a moment, but first a developing story from Moscow and Washington. The U.S. on Thursday confirmed a historic prisoner swap with Russia that included the release of American journalists Evan Gershkovich and Alsu Kurmasheva, former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, and permanent resident Vladimir Kara-Murza. In total, the U.S. secured the release of 16 individuals, including 5 wrongfully detained Germans and 7 Russian citizens, in return for 8 held in America, Germany, Poland, Norway, and Slovenia. It marked the largest prisoner swap between the United States and Russia since the Cold War. President Biden spoke at the White House.
Today we're bringing home Paul, Evan, Alsu, Vladimir. 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia. Paul for nearly 6 years. Vladimir since 2022. Evan since March of 2023. And Alsu since October of 2023. Russian authorities arrested them, convicted them in show trials, and sentenced them to long prison terms with absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever, none. Paul, a former Marine, was in Russia for a wedding. Evan, a journalist with a Russian, in Russia, was in Russia, signed by the Wall Street Journal. Alsu, also a journalist, was in Russia to see family. All 3 falsely accused of being spies. And Vladimir was a Russian citizen by birth and holds an American green card. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and was a pallbearer at my friend John McCain's funeral with me. He spoke out against Putin's regime, and for that he was convicted of treason. And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters that the deal is the culmination of many rounds of complex, painstaking negotiations over many, many months. Sullivan said the deal also marks the first time so many countries and allies worked together to secure the release of wrongfully detained individuals. Paul Beckett is an assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal, the paper where Gershkovich works. He said that it's certainly a reminder for all of our reporters who are in dangerous places that journalism is a risky business. It's a noble and valued endeavor that some governments in the world really don't like. For more on the deal, visit our website at voanews.com. The historic prisoner swap followed years of secretive, back-channel negotiations, despite relations between Washington and Moscow being at their lowest point since the Cold War following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Lots of questions remain unanswered on the timing and how it all came to be. For some analysis, my colleague Lori London spoke with VOA Chief National Correspondent Steve Herman.
What can you tell us, if anything, about how this came about and how long it might have been in the works?
This has been in the works a long time, many, many months. And it was a complicated diplomacy because this was not only something directly between Washington and Moscow. It involved a number of other countries, Russia, Germany, Turkey, Slovenia, Poland, Norway, Belarus, and maybe some others that we don't even know yet. And this is definitely historical, and it's the largest prisoner exchange since we've seen in decades, since the height of the Cold War.
Why now? What can you tell us about the timing of this?
Well, I can tell you from decades of experience of watching these sort of things come together is they come together when they come together. There's always an impetus, and obviously there are high-ranking officials, we assume Vladimir Putin in Moscow and Joe Biden in the White House, of course, who really wanted to have this accomplished. We can see from the position of the United States why they wanted to free these Americans, because it's been a major issue and a lot of pressure on the administration, a lot of pressure coming from major news organizations such as the Wall Street Journal and Radio Free Europe, the sister broadcaster of the Voice of America. What are the motivations here for Russia to do this? We don't know initially. Obviously, the Russians are not a government. The Kremlin doesn't usually just do things out of the goodness of their heart. Obviously, they're getting back several of their high-value people that were detained in other countries, and this includes, apparently some people that Germany and other countries were reluctant to release.
Is it surprising to you that this happened so close to the presidential election and not after the results in November?
If you want to get cynical, it's possible that once the Russians realized that Biden wasn't going to be president regardless after the election in November, that it took some of the, it changed the equation. But what we're hearing is actually just an hour before President Biden made his Sunday afternoon announcement that he was not going to continue to run for re-election, he was on the phone with the Slovenian prime minister helping to get this deal finalized. So it doesn't appear that there was any direct connection in that regard.
But it certainly is significant.
Well, it's certainly significant in that President Biden and by association, Vice President Kamala Harris, as part of the administration, will, be seen as, accomplishing something that is really, really significant. And it's something that happened on the Democrats' watch. And any good news for them getting within 100 days of the election is certain to make Americans in general just feel better about the administration, perhaps.
VOA Chief National Correspondent Steve Herman, thank you so much.
You are welcome, Lori.
That's Lori London speaking with VOA's Chief National Correspondent Steve Herman. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei presided over the funeral of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on Thursday, a day after Haniyeh was killed in an explosion in a residence where he was staying in the Iranian capital. Iran and its proxy Hamas have blamed Israel for the attack, while Israel has neither confirmed nor denied responsibility. The Iranian parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, told mourners at the funeral that Tehran will respond to the killing at the right place and at the right time, as he put it. He also said Israel will pay a heavy price. Alex Vatanka is director of the Iran program at the Washington-based Middle East Institute. My colleague Michael Lippin asked him about the significance of Khamenei presiding over the funeral of an ally who is not Iranian.
The first thing to remember is this is an unprecedented event. This has never happened before, certainly in the history of the Islamic Republic for the last 45 years, that they have a foreign visitor who is in Tehran for an important event and gets assassinated on the watch of the Iranian intelligence security services. So, Khamenei could have decided not to do anything, but obviously he chose to do the opposite, to come out in full swing, to preside over these coffins and to also promise revenge. Last time he did this, where there were non-Iranians at a funeral following an assassination but a rival of Iran, was in 2020, when Qasem Soleimani had been assassinated in Baghdad and with some Iraqis, and Khamenei did preside over the funeral. But this was an unusual situation, and the regime had no option but to put on a full show, as they did.
What kind of options do you think Khamenei is considering for a promised retaliation against Israel, which hasn't claimed responsibility for the killing of Haniyeh?
So the first thing to remember is he doesn't always come out and promise revenge. He does it when he feels he has no choice. if there is space to deny that something has happened to his regime, he oftentimes does not get involved. So if you look at the last couple of years where the Israelis have assassinated a number of Iranian commanders in places like Lebanon and Syria, oftentimes you wouldn't hear from Khamenei, but he couldn't deny that something big just happened in Tehran with most likely the Israelis took out Haniyeh. So number one is to listen to what he said. There will be revenge. Last time he said this was in April when Israel took out the Iranian consulate in Damascus and there was an Iranian retaliation. It took Iran about 2 weeks to do so. So I suspect there will be some kind of Iranian response. It might be something similar to what we saw in April, the combination of use of missiles and drones and so forth. But how big it will be is something they clearly are still deciding in Tehran.
What kind of factors do you think are feeding into their decision-making process?
They have to kind of, to the extent that they can, overcome the humiliation they just suffered at the hands of, again, most likely Israel. They have an image to protect, both at home and also in the region, with the acts of resistance and all the huffing and puffing the regime has done in terms of how strong it is. And then this happens on their watch. So yes, they need to sort of minimize the damage here. That's a factor. But there's also another factor that's actually going to probably restrain them. The way Ismail Haniyeh was killed would have required top-notch access to Iranian most sensitive of intelligence in terms of where the man was staying. What is the message from the fact that Israel had access to that sort of information? The message is Iran is fully infiltrated at the highest levels. And if you're Iran and you're about to embark on something major, it would almost seem rational to first take a step and do some house cleaning if you can to figure out how badly you're infiltrated before you take any major action against Israel and others in the region.
There was also a funeral today in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, in the southern part of the city. That's a stronghold of the Hezbollah group that's also an Iranian proxy. And you had the Hezbollah chief, Hassan Nasrallah, also promising to intensify attacks on Israel for taking out its top commander, Fuad Shukr, in a strike that happened a few hours before the killing of Haniyeh. What are you expecting on that front?
Well, the one thing I will point out immediately is I just mentioned earlier that Iran is badly infiltrated. Clearly, that's also the case at Hezbollah. I mean, Fuad Shukr was someone who had been out there known to the Israelis for a long time, but somehow left alone. And suddenly, in the course of a few days, 2 senior members of the axis of resistance are taken out, one in Tehran and one in Beirut. I mean, the message is very clear. And I think what you're hearing in Iran is, oh my God, the Israelis have such a wealth of intelligence that it's not whether they can target the most senior members of the axis of resistance in Iran, in Lebanon, elsewhere. It's when they choose to do it. And I think that's really telling in terms of the level of fear right now in the axis of resistance. How badly have they been infiltrated? So, I think before we start paying too much attention to that retaliation that Hezbollah will offer Israel, the Iranians will, that will happen. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic, the axis of resistance as a whole, right now, must surely be in a state of shock because they don't know who to trust within their own inner circles anymore.
That's VOA's Michael Lippin. He was speaking with Alex Vitanka, director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute. In a related story, the Israeli army released video on Thursday of an airstrike in Gaza that it says has killed the head of Hamas's military wing, Mohammed Deif, last month. The Israeli army said that fighter jets struck an area in Khan Yunis and the death of Deif was confirmed following an intelligence assessment. Hamas is yet to comment. Deif is believed to have been one of the masterminds of the Hamas October 7th terror attack on southern Israel, which triggered the Gaza war, now in its 10th month. You're listening to Flashpoint Global Crises from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish in Washington. A senior diplomat from North Korea has defected to the West. We'll find out what he's been saying soon. Now, though, Ukraine has started receiving F-16 fighter jets from Western allies. Anna Chernikova in Kyiv has the latest.
According to reports from a number of international media outlets, Ukraine received the first 6 F-16 fighter jets from the Netherlands. This was reported by Bloomberg and The Times with reference to anonymous sources. It is also reported that several more will soon arrive from Denmark. Official Kyiv has not yet confirmed the arrival of the long-awaited F-16 fighter jets in Ukraine. Likewise, the Netherlands has not yet officially confirmed the delivery. In a letter dated July 1st, the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands in the previous government, Kaisa Ollongren, informed the parliament that the delivery of the first aircraft will take place in the near future. On July 16th, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Danish planes would start arriving soon. The planes will be equipped with updated radars and modern American weapons, including anti-radar missiles, laser-guided bombs, and medium-range air-to-air missiles. Denmark undertook to transfer 19 aircraft and the Netherlands 24 overall. Norway and Belgium will also transfer fighter jets to Ukraine. In his evening address, published just hours after Bloomberg reported that Ukraine has received its first long-awaited F-16 jets, President Volodymyr Zelensky said, Kyiv needs more resources to defend the sky. He referred to the Russian massive Wednesday drone attack when Ukrainian air defense reported a shutdown of all 89 drones launched mainly at Kyiv and the Kyiv region. He said Ukraine needs more reliable air defense systems and a sufficient range of weapons. Zelensky mentioned that Ukraine will keep working with allies, convincing, seeking and delivering to Ukraine what is needed for defense, and jointly manufacturing necessary weapons. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
More devastation for India. Recovery efforts are ongoing in Kerala state in southern India as the area is still reeling from landslides earlier in the week that have claimed 200 lives. Authorities there are now concerned about the spread of disease and of the psychological welfare of survivors.
That's
Pinare Vajian. He's the chief of Kerala State. He says the spread of disease in relief camps must be stopped to prevent an epidemic so that this disaster does not spiral into something even worse. Along with their physical health, state authorities are bringing in counselors to care for the survivors' mental health needs. All this as flash floods in northern India's Himachal Pradesh on Thursday have killed at least 11 and have left dozens missing. Search and rescue operations are ongoing there as well. Elsewhere, a senior diplomat in North Korea's diplomatic mission to Cuba has defected. He says that Pyongyang is looking for ways to ease sanctions. Ryan Chang of Reuters has that story.
North Korea is keen to restart nuclear talks with the United States if Donald Trump is re-elected as president. That's according to a high-profile North Korean defector, senior diplomat Ri Il-gyu, who escaped from Cuba last month. In an exclusive interview with Reuters in Seoul, his first sit-down talk with international media, Ri said Pyongyang's working on a new negotiating strategy with the aim of lifting sanctions on its weapons programs, removing its designation as a state sponsor of terrorism, and eliciting economic aid.
This time, the foreign ministry would definitely gain power and take charge, and it won't be so easy for Trump to tie North Korea's hands and feet again for 4 years without giving anything.
Ri's comments signal a potential 180 turn from Pyongyang. In recent statements, the North has said it could ditch the possibility of dialogue with the US and warned of armed confrontation. A 2019 summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and then-President Trump in Vietnam collapsed over sanctions, for which Ri partly blamed Kim's decision to entrust what he called inexperienced and clueless military commanders with nuclear diplomacy.
Kim Jong-un doesn't know much about international relations and diplomacy, which means he is not good at making strategic judgments.
Meanwhile, Ri said North Korea received help with its missile technology and economy by forging closer ties with Russia. But he says the bigger gain could be to block additional sanctions and undercut existing ones, raising Pyongyang's bargaining power against Washington. According to Ri, the COVID-19 lockdown deepened hardships at home and for those stationed overseas. Financial troubles also forced North Korea to shut down a dozen of its 54 diplomatic missions.
As I recall, there were talks about reopening around April or May 2023. From that time, these kinds of messages started to leak out. Those who were summoned were told to bring everything, even used spoons and toothbrushes back home.
Ri said Kim is also looking to hold a summit with Japan for economic support. In return, it'll offer concessions on the issue of Japanese nationals abducted by North Korea in the 1970s and 80s. Tokyo believes North Korea abducted 17 of its citizens, 5 of whom returned to Japan in 2002, but Tokyo suspects hundreds more may have been taken. Ri is the most senior diplomat to defect to the South since 2016. He says his job at the embassy in Cuba was to impede the launch of diplomatic relations between South Korea and Cuba, a Cold War-era ally of North Korea. He now says the South's diplomatic success with Cuba is the best thing South Korea had done since last year, and a model example of how the tides of history have turned. Ri said he had imagined a life in South Korea since his childhood, but he cemented his decision to leave the reclusive North after Pyongyang refused his request to get medical treatment in Mexico at his own expense for a ruptured disc in his neck.
Reuters' Ryan Chang reporting for us today. On Thursday, protesters in Lagos, Nigeria, voiced their discontent with government reforms that they claim have worsened the cost of living crisis.
We are tired of being hungry. We cannot even feed our children.
Authorities have deployed armed security personnel and fired tear gas to quell any potential violence. Elsewhere in Africa, young Kenyans, mostly members of Generation Z, have been leading the nationwide protests now in their second month. Organized largely on social media, the protests have snowballed into a movement calling for good governance in the country. So who are these young people that polls show have more than 80% support from Kenyans? Juma Majanga reports from Nairobi.
These have been the scenes in the streets of Nairobi and across Kenya for the past 2 months. Young people leading demonstrations to call for good governance. Their protests were sparked by a contentious tax bill that President William Ruto later withdrew. But protesters say the president has to step down as well. 26-year-old Kasmuel Makoure has been in the forefront of the protests. He says the Ruto must go call is not an attack on Ruto personally, but a call for good governance.
It is the Ruto-isms, the isms that have been associated with him, the corruption that bedevils his government, the cronyism, the sheer incompetence of the people who surround him in government, the sheer number of unconstitutional offices that we've had to endure in his tenure. Ruto must go is a clarion call to a better Kenya.
Recent polls show over 80% of Kenyans support the youth-led protests. Wanjiru says this is because the protesters spoke to the feelings of many Kenyans.
Kenya is in a bad situation. Our political leaders do not reflect our aspirations. And the young people have come and spoken to our aspirations.
Analysts say to bring about real change, the youth-led movement has to organize politically and collaborate with other progressive political groups. President Ruto says the government will not allow further protests in the country, saying, quote, "Enough is enough." But activists note the right to peaceful protest is guaranteed in the Constitution, and protesters like Mark Oure are defiant. They are planning a major demonstration in Nairobi on August 8th. Juma Majanga, VOA News, Nairobi.
And that's going to wrap it up for today. There's more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of everyone here at VOA, thanks for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Steve Karish.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA Podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with the 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.